anybody with $100 in 5 minutes can go in and start a company.
I'll start it in 3 years, I'll be exited and I'll have, $50 million.
I think I would have got to that a lot faster.
But it doesn't sound like you did that.
You don't know what it takes to succeed in the US market.
So anyone who's listening who's American, who wants that feedback, because you do get that from them, like, oh, we're so rude.
I wish I'd known all of that. When I got started,
I got all the wrong advice. What's the right advice then?
If capital efficiency is a priority, you pay a lot more attention to that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. We probably just don't align.
At the end of the day, does it matter?
I'm Shona Grundy, founder and host of These Three Things, a podcast aimed at building a thriving and more inclusive startup ecosystem through sharing real lessons from people doing the hard work. We focus on the three strategically critical aspects of the startup journey: raising capital, finding product market fit, and expanding offshore. If you find this useful, please subscribe and recommend the podcast to at least 3 other people. We appreciate you lending us your ears and joining us for this episode. Today's guest is Angie Judge, a Kiwi technology entrepreneur revolutionizing the museum experience. Founder and CEO of Dexibit, Angie brings artificial intelligence into the world's cultural institutions and has been recognized as the global leader in data science for the cultural sector. Her passion for history, art, and science, coupled with computer engineering and analytics, inspires her to make data-driven insight accessible to all humans. Welcome, Angie, to These Three Things.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I've watched some of your talks and things on YouTube, and they're really great stories. I'm kind of fascinated by your background. You're known for big data and analytics. So how did you get into this? Because you started Dexibit some years ago. When was that? And then how did you get into it?
So Dexibit started in 2016. And before that, I think I'd spent about 10 years in my tech career and did the traditional route, I guess, of went to university, studied software engineering, commerce, and then went and worked for a sort of what would be now called fintech company, but back then was not called that. And then I went and worked for Hewlett-Packard and then an Israeli company called Amdocs. And I got into network analytics and sort of understanding how technology could be used to manage cell phone networks, which is really technically an advanced industry and really interesting technology, but incredibly boring as an industry. Like trying to make cell phone towers work better is only so exciting. And I really wanted to do something technically really exciting, but in an industry that I was really passionate about, that felt like I was achieving something in the world. And so helping the world's cultural and now commercial attractions go from gut feel to insight inspired has been a mission that I felt like I could dedicate my life's work to.
Actually helping these institutions protect and share our history is super important. Probably something that most people don't just walk around and think about, but how, where did that initial idea come from that you were like, I want to solve this for this industry sector?
I was really interested in visitor experiences and the data that came off it. And back in 2015, 2016, there were lots of apps that came out of sort of the app revolution of trying to help, things like museum visitors connect with the collection. And I went out and dabbled in some of that stuff. And the interesting thing when you get into that is that most of the museum management and the attraction executives behind those ideas, they're interested more in the data that they generate necessarily in, delivering yet another app experience for a visitor into their institution. And so that's for me where the ideas that went on to become Dexibit came from, was understanding the importance of that. And I remember back then I was at the Smithsonian. It was at the National Museum of American Indian, who is now one of our customers. But I saw one of their security guards clicker counting people into the museum with one of those handheld clicker counters. And that for me was like the light bulb moment of, this is data as it stands at the moment for this sector. This is what it's like globally. And still now today, when we have new customers who turn up and talk to us for the first time, they'll say, oh, yeah, we're clicker counting visitors at the gate. And that literally is often, together with clipboards and spreadsheets and emails and PDFs and PowerPoints is how they're managing their data. And that was the problem that I set out to solve.
So you were able to bring what you understood about computers and how they collected and managed data? Because, 2016, it wasn't really that well understood. I think now in today's world, we understand that computers are counting every movement that we're doing online, right? But you had a very clear understanding how they could be brought together.
And doing that in a real world situation and doing that with data between lots of different systems. One of the unique problems that our customers have is that they're quite complex business models. You think about a visitor attraction, they sell tickets, maybe there's parts of it that might be free, where you can just waltz on in. And of course, once you get in the doors, they're interested in where you go and what that journey looks like. But they've got shops, often many of them, sometimes they're run by third-party operators, or they might have like a coin printing press or, weird things that you can do that you can spend money on. They've got food and beverage, maybe multiple, maybe one's a cafe, one's a restaurant. They've got events where maybe you can have your wedding there, or you can hire it out for a corporate conference, or you might go along to like a lecture series, or they might have a party for Halloween, for example. They've got experiences that you might do a tour, or you might do a breakout room. They've got tickets for different things that they're selling. So they've got lots and lots of different systems. And then, of course, there's everything that's happening online as well. And you can leave them a review and go on their social and everything else. And so the unique problem that they have is that they're complex business models with lots of disparate systems and then lots of data that together comprises their visitor experience. And they kind of have to suss the insight between all of these things to attribute what's happening and why. And that's where the power of what we do comes into play. And it was that sort of complex problem that formed the basis and essence of what we do now.
I'm just listening to museums or experiences as I know it. That's kind of leads me into then, how did you decide you were going to start a business around it? And then how did you wrap a business model around it for institutions that aren't really there to make profit, right? They're not a commercial business. They're about protecting our culture and our history. How did you kind of go, there's a problem over there, they're for good, for community, for humanity. How do I actually turn that into a business that I can make money from, or investors are prepared to invest in and go, yes, I can see that's a great problem, but how are you going to make money?
Yeah, I think it came down to we were solving a really complex problem, and it's a really valuable problem to solve. For example, the manual work that you have to do clicker counting and spreadsheets and clipboards and everything else, as multiple people, multiple full-time resources each year, which you can imagine what that cost is. The alternative to buying Dexibit requires a team of like data analysts and scientists and engineers and software developers, which for most of these organizations, non-profit or not, even if they're commercial, is out of their price range. And so the problem that we're solving is a valuable problem to solve. And that for us offers a price point that can support a business model where you can sell in person, provide success in person, but the beauty of doing that through a software as a service model is that the customer doesn't have to invest lots in getting the technology stood up in the first place. So they benefit from the economies of scale and all of the other benefits of SaaS. And back in 2016, SaaS was still a relatively new, it sounds like not that long ago, but it was still like a relatively new period of time in SaaS. And I was really interested. I was working in companies where we were all on pre-cloud, pre-SaaS, on-prem, upfront license technology. And I was really interested and really passionate about SaaS business models. And I really wanted to get into a SaaS business model. So I was coming up with this way of shaping this business around the ideas and the value points of SaaS, worked out that we had a problem that was worth solving. And then I went and looked at the global market in museums alone, which is where we started, and we then have expanded out into cultural attractions, which for us is like museums, galleries, zoos, parks, aquariums, libraries, everything else, and then again into all attractions, so including commercials, the stadiums, the theme parks, the tourist attractions. But even that first part of museums alone, there's 45,000 of them in the US. Like, that's more than McDonald's and Starbucks combined. Like, it is and you take anything in the world, and I think the fascinating thing when you start to look at it on a global basis is that most markets you can find a huge global market for if you go looking, at the global scale of it. And so you look at, like, there's 350,000 libraries in the world. There is several billion people who have a visitor experience in an attraction every year. And the cool thing for us now is that we provide analytics for about 367 million of them, which is pretty cool.
I just want to pause here for a minute to tell you about our sponsor, Callaghan Innovation, Aotearoa New Zealand's innovation agency. This agency empowers innovators, helping you transform your world-bettering ideas into commercially successful ventures. What you may or may not know is that Callaghan have a fantastic suite of products called Upskill. These products will help you identify the innovation, R&D and commercialization skills you need to amplify and elevate your ideas, and then train you to put them into practice. So go check it out by heading over to their website, callahaninnovation.govt.nz/upskill. And so that's quite interesting, because I think most people, when they're looking for a problem to solve where they can wrap a business around it, they're probably just looking at really obvious things that they think are big commercial enterprises. But you actually just went, this is a problem that I care about. It's worth solving. It's worth protecting. And actually, I'm going to look into the market size. And that was like, I had, the size of that market is incredible. I mean, that would have been a light bulb moment for anyone to go, this is big enough. Like, there is a business here. So,
yeah, I think there's a lot of merit in going after the big markets. Everybody goes after the healthcares and the retail. And in my case, the telco was the market that I was used to, that I came from. And before that, finance, like there's the big markets of the world. But the problem is those markets are quite crowded. And it's really hard when you're starting out to go big in a crowded market where there's lots of big players with lots of big money behind them. It's a lot easier to pick your niche and be amazing at that niche and dominate that niche globally. And even keeping that niche nice and tight in the first, days, weeks, months, years, and then gradually expanding it out as you fill it and achieve that dominance. It's a really great business strategy when you're starting out for the first time.
At what point did you capital raise? Did you go out and say, okay, I actually need money here now to support my effort? Or did you go out with an initial prototype? How did you get started?
Bit of all. We went into a incubator accelerator type program called Lightning Lab. At the time, it was run by Creative HQ, what is now Ice House Ventures, and a bunch of others working together. And that was really great for me, because I'd had this sort of 10 years working in the corporate space for multinationals where, you got billions of dollars at play and teams of hundreds of thousands of people, and all the products are pre-built and everything's sort of kind of easy when you're at the top end of town. And I didn't know how to think as a startup and the kind of rhythms and the ways of doing that. And I got some really bad advice when I started out of go and, spend a year writing a business plan and researching things, all of the wrong things to do. And so it was a really great experience for me to go into the incubator accelerator. And back then it was like a 3 or 4 month program, and it accumulated in this investor demo day. And we raised, I think it was 600,000 in the space of 3 weeks off the back of that demo day, which was back then the largest, fastest raise that had happened. I mean, these days the numbers are a lot more impressive than that. But it was a really great way to get started, and that kind of gave us the initial funds to really get going as a company. But at the same time, we were doing all of those other things that you talked about of the research, and also going out and taking a prototype out to markets. We got a couple of customers here in New Zealand, and then some over in the US, and that of course helps with then raising investment and valuations and everything else.
I'm curious about that comment that you just made about I got all the wrong advice. what's the right advice then? What if you like, I'm looking back on myself then and I would say I would do X, Y, and Z now, what would it be?
Yeah, I think, it comes back down to that, and chasing of the product market fit and the validation and everything else, right? And that soon became what we focused on of, doing the right discovery and validating all the assumptions and essentially proving that out through sales and later on retention. But I think I would have got to that a lot faster. There was a bit of mucking around in the beginning of doing a little bit too much of the research and planning that at the end of the day doesn't matter. What matters is getting out there and discovering the product. But I think it wasn't probably until we started looking at product and product management in a different way, even as late as when the pandemic was setting in. So this is 3 or 4 years down the track, that I think we really honed in on how we did product discovery as a team in a really effective way. And that, again, I wish I'd known all of that when I got started, but it definitely took a pandemic for us to reset how we approach product and get great at doing that.
So, your discovery was, I was in my bubble, I was doing computer research or market research, I was writing plans, which is needed, right? But you're like, get in front of the customers, I needed to get in front of them.
Yeah, and test ideas out in product and find those sort of MVP ways of testing ideas out before building product around.
You raised money. What was that experience like for you? What did you need what do you think were the trigger points that got investors over the line?
I think the big thing is making sure that you're ticking the right box around sort of the investment thesis that you're presenting, that you've got the right evidence to line up and how you've been performing so far, and what that result and trajectory looks like. One of the things that stood out for us really, really early on was that we were going straight to the US. We didn't sit back and do the old, let's get a bunch of customers in New Zealand and then let's get a bunch of customers in Australia, and then later on we, spend a long time going to the US and then find out somebody else has already. We just went straight there. And so we had 1 or 2 customers in New Zealand and then went straight into the States. And that worked out really well when it came to fundraising, because we already had customers in the US. We'd already learned some of those hard lessons. And when an investor looked at us, a prospective investor, and said, you don't know what it takes to succeed in the US market, we did at that point. We had that experience. And so that really helped. And a lot of those names that we brought on, even quite early in those stages, were really big names. One of the benefits that we've had as a company is that we've got some of the biggest brands in the world, some of the biggest institutions in our sector as customers. And even back then, that early, that proved out that we were solving a really important problem to the point where those big organizations would interact with a young startup like us.
Did you just raise the $600,000 going, that's me, I've got enough to get myself going? Or did you have what was the plan? Did you have plans that you'll raise again? Or, most people, companies or startups would go, 600,000, that's a huge amount of money, that'll take me a long way. What was going on for you?
It was always part of a stepping stone raising strategy that we thought we'll do a couple of, angel family and friends, angel type investment rounds, and then get into something institutional. And we raised our institutional round in 2019, pre-pandemic, with VC, boutique VC involvement at that point. And so that first round was really just to help build out the initial product and get sort of initial customers on board and get through that first year of contracting and get into renewals and everything else in order to then get into the next milestones and raise further after that. But my philosophy on it and our strategy on it has always been to keep raising light. We've been an incredibly capital efficient company, to the point where we haven't raised, since 2019. We've gone through pandemic and everything else, because we've been able to use money that people have invested in us really wisely. We've been really targeted with the investments that we've made. we've been very sensible about how we've, and probably a little bit unsexy, but about how we've spent money, and we've done the hard yards, flying economy and all of the other very unglamorous things that come with doing a startup. But that capital efficiency has always been a really important thing for us. And I think when it comes to thinking about a fundraising strategy, that comes down to like the valuations that you sign up for, that you then have to outperform, that then maybe affects optionality for you in the future as a company, and sort of backtracking that. If you are, starting a company, you're looking at these articles in the Herald, all of these really glamorous kind of $100 million valuation and raised $20 million. Like, it sounds amazing, but those are huge things to sign up for. And they change the trajectory about what options are available to you as a company in the future. And that can make things, very difficult to succeed with. And so keeping your capital needs as slim as you possibly can, preserves your equity as a founder, preserves your options that you have as a future. And I believe builds a much healthier company than like raising extreme amounts, wasting it on stuff, burying problems like product market fit, because you've made up for it with investment dollars. So that's been a big part for us behind what we've raised and when.
That's really interesting, because then there's this conflicting opinion from some investors that, but if you don't raise enough, you're not being ambitious enough and you don't understand what it takes to capture these markets. What would you say to that? I mean, because you're obviously saying, well, that's not been my experience.
Yeah, 100%. And I totally respect, and there is definitely a place for the rah-rah Silicon Valley approach. And I'm not one of those founders who go out and do the massive like 10, 20, 50, $100 million raises and just on to the next. There's definitely a place for that. It's just not within my approach. So I definitely, for all the companies who've gone out there and done it, I totally respect it as a decent approach. I do think at the moment what we're seeing in the market is a lot of course correction on that. So whilst there's a few, wild cards that works for, I think there's been a little bit too much of it in the market. And what we're seeing now in 2022, 2023 is a bit of course correction to come back to more, business economics that makes sense, more focus on capital efficiency. And I think ultimately it will make the sector a little bit healthier in some of its decisions.
I think that's what I've seen an article recently where capital efficiency is like the number one, even above product market fit and the valuation and competitors. They're like, at the moment, I want to know how efficient you are with your capital. Potentially that's like when you're going out looking for VCs, that's where the alignment needs to come, right? Like if a VC says to you, well, I don't think you're being ambitious enough, your plans aren't big enough, and bigger plans take more money, more investment, it's potentially a good thing to say, okay, thank you for that. We probably just don't align.
Yeah, 100%.
That's okay.
And I think you can be ambitious and efficient at the same time. Like, it doesn't mean that I don't want a huge outcome. It just means that I plan on getting there in a way that I think makes good business sense. And I don't agree, and I don't feel comfortable with raising ginormous amounts of money and hiding a lot of business problems that a startup hasn't learnt the hard way through efficiency. Like, for example, you can pour a ton of money into a sales and marketing machine, and then you can leak it all out the other side with retention issues. If capital efficiency is a priority, you pay a lot more attention to that than if you're just burning through cash.
And I think that segues really nicely into product market fit. You've noticed that and you've just said it before, that if you don't have product market fit, all those problems are hidden in the fact that you've raised all this money, and so it looks good from the outside. You've hired sales and marketing, but the data and behind those conversions of your sales and retention is showing it, but you're having to hide it from everyone. It's like, well, we'll just keep putting more money into it. So product market fit, you just talked about, how you've approached product and things going forward. What's your opinion on it, and what's the importance that it plays in a business?
I think for us, maybe this is a unique experience for us being a data product as opposed to, somebody who's building a CRM or a point of sale or something that's a little bit clearer of a pathway. But I think one of the dilemmas with a data product is that product market fit is never finished. And I haven't decided in my mind if this feels like a unique thing to the only one experience that I have of founding a company in the data space. But, since 2016, the data space has moved hugely. Like when we first started out, our customers' main objectives was get a bunch of KPIs from disparate systems onto a single dashboard. These days, obviously, they've got far more, ambitious goals in doing that in terms of what they want to achieve with artificial intelligence and all of these other sorts of things that have become almost table stakes over the years. And so for us, the product market fit curve moves, and it's moved in 2020 over the course of the pandemic when data became a lot more, or data literacy across the world became a lot more ready. Everybody's looking at stats of COVID on the news every night, and we all suddenly became kind of semi-statisticians overnight. And then, in 2023, 22, we have, of course, had the all of the rise of ChatGPT and things, and now that's become almost a table stakes element. So sort of over the course of the last, 7 years, this landscape of what people hope to achieve with data moves and moves and moves. And we find this even with a customer's maturity with our product. The problems that they come to with in the first instance when they join us and sign up to our product, they then solve those pretty quick. And then they move on to a next set of problems and the next set of problems. And as that customer matures with us, what becomes success for them with our product, that landscape moves as well. So you're always constantly, I feel like, with a data product at least, chasing a moving finishing line in terms of product market fit on an industry scale and also on a customer success scale. And I think that's kind of what makes it exciting in a way, because you're finding new problems to solve and new boundaries, to break into, and new technology and new innovation and everything else that comes along with it. And so I don't know if that's sort of a theory I have yet on PMF, but I think that it's a job that's never done. And so I don't think anybody can really, at least in the data space, stand up there and say, I think I'm done with product market fit.
What are your processes, so what's either your processes and or the data you're using to understand where your current level is and where you're chasing that next level? Because it sounds like you're constantly like trying to look at your next horizon, like where is it going next so that I can keep up with my customers? What do you guys do to do that?
The big things, there's lots of leading and lagging indicators that we can use as a business around measuring this, everything from things like retention, if a customer is signing up a contract, particularly when you're getting post 2 or 3 years, when you're getting into the lifetimes of customers that are 5, 6, 7 years, obviously those are really good indicators for me of product market fit, but a very lagging indicator. And then there's all the sort of leading indicators of how that works out through sales and product metrics and everything else. But I think for me, again, this might be something that's unique to a data product, is for us, we can put a graph in front of a customer or a visualization, and we can put data into that visualization and we can show a customer something. But ultimately, there has to be like this little light bulb that happens in their brain. It depends, because some of our product is used for operational purposes where we just want to know like how many people came in the door, how much money did we make, whatever, how happy were they. But then some of it is used for insight, for decision making and for things that are more strategic. And we have to try and measure this moment when we have a new idea in our product. Like, has a light bulb happened for this person? And the only way that we've worked out how to measure these light bulbs is face-to-face, even if it's via Zoom, good customer discovery and good customer feedback and good customer relationships. And I don't think that any number will ever sort of replace some of that more qualitative aspects to product management and software, particularly when you're dealing with an enterprise customer, because there's just so much nuance and that moment of light bulb, particularly when you're working in an executive team in collaboration, like, has this person really understood what this visualization is saying them? Have they really perceived value from the insight that it's giving them? And will they take action based on what they've learned through this? And is that something that they're going to come back to and associate that value with this product? And it's a really hard thing to metric because none of these leading or lagging indicators will really tell you that.
That was actually one of my questions. I was thinking, your premise that I've read is like, you democratize data for your customers. And my initial thought was, did they know they had a problem with their, their democracy of their data? And I think you were just sort of describing that.
Yeah, and working out what that looks like. One of the challenges that we have in democratizing data is, for us, that means taking a data source and applying it to lots of personas, lots of levels of data literacy, and lots of different departments and seniorities in an organization. So we are not just a product that, like, a data analyst would use. We're a product that aims for everybody from, like, the front desk to the boardroom to use. And we're not just a product that, like, the marketing department uses. We're a product that finance and visitor services and security and retail and exhibitions and events and all of these sort of different departments will use. And so democratizing data for us means solving problems for all of those different audiences at all of those different levels, at all of those different moments of data literacy and confidence. And so making sure that each of those perceive value and feel like their light bulbs have been solved is a real complexity and challenge with a product like that.
I was just thinking of all those user personas that you mentioned. So there's first the identification that they exist. I've seen problems where, though, you look for the frontline user of your data and they love it and they want it and they find value, but then you lose actually the stakeholder who will be prepared to pay for it. So is there any sort of strategy as to how you approach that, when you're looking at your different types of users in order to ensure that it's stayed within the organization?
Yeah, we definitely have some of the similar problems, which is that sometimes the users of our product are different from the buyers, the economic buyers of our product. We are pretty lucky in that a lot of the time we touch the finance department and often the CFO, so that definitely helps things. But yeah, that's definitely a good plus for us, and it's something that we focus on unashamedly in success, that we like to get lots of financial reports going. We like to make sure that they get up to an exec level. We like to make sure that we have our exec reviews, going through with senior leadership and even the board to offer them insight and to provide like a briefing on some of the numbers so that we know that they have a clear line of sight to the value that our product provides, because of this dilemma that sometimes your users can be different to your buyers and you kind of need to satisfy both.
And in order to communicate that value, yeah. So it's a bit more of a strategy just than luck, right?
I guess.
Yeah. I'm just interested in something that you've said in the past, and I really liked it. You must love the problem your business solves. You'll be married to that problem for better or worse, in sickness and in health, till exit. Do you part? Do you want to just talk about what that means for you, being in this business now for, what'd you say, it was like 7 years or so, 8 years? Yeah.
Because you do, as a founder or anybody working in a fast growth company, you're in this thing like, we often start work at the morning at like 4 a.m. because that's when our customers are online, and sometimes you've got a meeting with a customer over in the UK and you'll be up till 10, 11 p.m. on a call. And so you are like really immersed in this problem, and you've got to talk about it all day, every day, and think about it all night, every night. And so I do think it really helps that it's a problem that you love in an industry that you love and customers that you love. I love going to customer sites and visiting customers because, of course, I get to see all sorts of really cool things and the people are amazing there. And if you can draw energy like that and passion that will sort of re-energize you to sustain you across some of the harder parts of the journey And the longer parts of the journey, I think you're all the better for it. And plus, it just makes it more enjoyable. I could not imagine doing what I'm doing, optimizing cell phone towers. Like, I just would have got sick of that a long time ago. And who would want to talk about that all day, every day? So I just really love, when we get on a customer call and they're like, I've got, these different skill groups coming in and I want to understand how they're experiencing things like the history of slavery. Like, those are amazing things to be talking about, and an amazing privilege to work in a sector that's solving for things like that.
I think there's some lessons in just, the soul searching, that you've got to understand how deep this goes, how married to it you are, and that, you've got to be passionate about it, because it's going to go on for years. It's not, I think some people have this perception of, I'll start it in 3 years, I'll be exited and I'll have, $50 million, because, it's just not the reality, is it? Yeah.
And I hate the word founder. I don't actually tend to use it that much, because to me, anybody with $100 in 5 minutes can go in and start a company. And the act of founding is really actually like the smallest part of the journey. The real challenge is leading, and it's not just what you do in a year or 2 years, it's what you do in a decade. And it's that kind of, if you want to have the ambition, regardless of how much money you raise, it's your commitment to how long and how hard and how big you can go with that really matters.
I'd like to talk about going offshore, because we touched on that a little bit, and I'm really interested that you had this very conscious decision that you're not even going to start in New Zealand. You probably maybe did with one that was close, but you were just like, I'm just so focused on my bigger market. Where did that decision making come from? And then how did you actually start that very first moment to go offshore?
Well, when you look at the global market, for a lot of industries, ours is no different. The US is going to be a huge portion of that. And so I figured, why wait to get to the place that you want to be? Why not start there? Because the problem is, if you build a company for a local market, things like simple things like in analytics, a big part of it is date formats. This is a very important part to product design. And the problem with date formats is, if you design your product around a local New Zealand market, you go day, month, year. And we don't even realize that in America this is done differently. And so if you build for an American market, you understand that the way that they look at dates is different, that they always lead with the month, and it looks really upside down to us, but this is how it's done over there. And so it's these little tiny things like this that are small, through to quite big things, like consciously using American spelling and American words in all of your marketing materials everywhere, that, create a difference in terms of the company that you build. And so I think if you're aiming to be somewhere, why not start there? Because then you make all of these conscious and subconscious decisions along the way that design you for where you want to be, not where you began. So that was part of the sort of puzzle behind us of choosing to focus on America, and secondly to go there early, was to make sure that we kind of lined ourselves up for where we wanted to be.
And so then what did you do? Was it a phone call first? Was it you just got on a plane and hoped someone would meet you? Or how did that first? That's scary. That's, you're a startup, you don't have money, what's that first step?
Yeah, we went to, every industry has a conference, right? If it's not a regional one, an international one. And what blows my mind about America is how big these conferences are, and how big the places are that host them is just insane. And so we went to the American Alliance of Museums. This is one of the largest industry organizations or bodies in our sector for cultural institutions. And we went to their annual conference. There was 5,000 or so museums there. I'm going to another one in Orlando next month for commercial attractions, and there's 15,000 there. It's just, the scale of it is just incredible. And we got a little 3x3 meter, 9-foot by 9-foot stand and put up a poster and just talked to as many people as we could, handed out business cards and brochures and USB sticks and everything else, and just, set as many meetings as we could. We eventually, as the next year rolled round, got speaking slots, and as the next year round, got to fill those panels with our customers, and as the next year rolled round, got to sponsor and things like that, and sort of grew from there. But just getting on a plane and turning up to these conferences, perceiving this industry, like seeing this industry, seeing all the players, being able to meet some of the people, immerse yourself in it, I think is the only way to start.
If you would suggest it to other companies that are thinking about it, would you, normally we look at the United States and we might go, it's just so huge. Often the suggestion is just pick a state and go for it. But it doesn't sound like you did that. Yeah, what are your thoughts around that?
I don't know. A lot of people gave me this advice. They were like, oh, the US isn't one market, it's 50. And I'm not sure that I agree with that because it's not that much different doing business with a customer in California as it is in New York. There are some subtle cultural differences between them, but then of course Americans travel a lot and move about a lot domestically as well. So often you'll be dealing with New Yorkers in California and Californians in New York. And so there is some things like that sometimes the tax is different that you pay in different states. Sometimes if you're employing people in different states, there's different employment laws. We decided to base ourselves out of DC, which is an unusual choice, regrettable for the time zone. It's East Coast, so it's kind of like the worst time zone in the US for working with New Zealand, means very early rises. Terrible for flights because you always have to hop across and you've gotten the extra travel of traveling all the way across the states. But the reason why we chose this was that it is kind of the cultural mecca of almost the world. Every one of the big national museums, in our case, is based out of DC. We work a lot these days with the US government across lots of different departments. So we're very fortunate that we have a very big base now of customers in the DC area. So that was beneficial for us. So it felt like a really good place to be. And I think this would be my only piece of advice to people going into America is I would steer closer to being where your customers are that want to buy your product, not to where other companies are that are building products. So many people just go to Silicon Valley because that's where all of the other startups are. But it's really hard to hire there. You're paying massive expenses on everything from people through to like renting offices. And, it's hard for you to get out and meet customers and be around customers and get immersed in customers. And of course, customers look at you and go, oh, it's just another Silicon Valley company. And they sort of have a perception that comes with that. So we wanted to be immersed and local with our customers. And DC became a really nice home for that. It was easy for us to make our mark in that space. And we found it a really practical city for getting up to New York and down to Florida and all of these other sort of places across to the UK. It was actually quite a nice little global hub for that.
And I think that's the difference that we've emerged to. Way back when Silicon Valley first started emerging, tech was its own thing, its own industry. But now tech proliferates across every single industry. So I can see what you're saying. You're like, well, yes, we're a technology company, but I'm actually in the museum and exhibition industry. That's my industry, and this is where they are. And so this is where I should be, instead of thinking about these other tech companies that I'm never going to do business with. Yeah, I do see that a lot as just this very immediate decision to go to San Francisco. And it's like, I'm not sure why you did that. Any challenges for setting up those offices other than like time zones or, traveling? What were some of the big challenges for you when you actually like, okay, I'm going to have a presence now here?
Yeah, so we sort of went through, I guess, a few different phases of setting up presence there. The first was the fly in, fly out, sleep on the friend's couch phase. The second was, hiring people and getting an office, or back then I think we had a WeWork. And then the third was being more permanent. I actually pre-pandemic half lived in DC and then half lived here. So very impractically, I did a month there and a month here and then a month there and then a month here, which I wouldn't recommend, but it definitely worked for the time. These days, now that Zoom is so much more acceptable, and people are used to dealing, I think, a little bit more remotely, it's maybe not quite so necessary, but it was what was needed back then to sort of cement ourselves and get going. And then, of course, behind that, you have to register an incorporated company in the States and get bank accounts and all of these sorts of other things. And some of those are just awfully difficult, pragmatic, sort of logistical things that you've got to do. We actually signed up to a thing called the Stripe Atlas program back then, which got you a Silicon Valley bank account. So, of course, we had our money sitting in there when that hit.
Yes.
Yes, but I think these days, of course, that's a little bit different and maybe easier in some ways, harder in others. But there's just a lot of hoops you've got to go through and lots of laws that you've got to learn, particularly when it comes to hiring. For example, in DC, the problem with DC is that it's a drive-in sort of the DMV drive zone for DC crosses the state of Maryland and Virginia. And then you've got the District of Columbia and sometimes people coming from further afield. And your employment law is where your employee lives, not where you're based. And so if you've got someone living in Virginia and driving across a 15-minute drive to you in DC, you've got to suddenly subscribe to 2 tax systems and everything else that comes with that. So there's all of these little things that you just learn along the way. They're just part and parcel of scaling.
Did you get professional advice? Did you get support? What did you do to help you with that?
Yeah, there's no cheating that, I think, in cheaping out, but you've just got to have a good tax attorney, good lawyer, and an accountant stateside to help you work on things. You've got to then also have, I forget the official name for it, but your transfer licensing agreement to be able to bring money back into your parent company and how you structure that, and you just need professional help to do that.
How did you decide between going into another country or going deeper into the current country you're in? So a lot of companies would have gone, okay, I'm in the US, I'm feeling good. Now I've got to keep doing world domination. So this actually comes from one of your staff members. They're wanting to know, why have we decided we're going to stay?
That's interesting. We haven't turned away business from other markets, but we haven't invested in seeking it out in other geographic markets. And that is purely because you dilute. So why dilute a dollar that you could spend in a market that you know works, that you might have got some presence in, but we certainly haven't soaked up 100% of it, versus spending that money in Saudi Arabia, for example, where it's going to be a lot riskier and a lot more diluted. So it's just purely a return on investment about where we get the biggest bang for the buck on marketing and sales efforts. But we haven't turned away customers that have come from other geographic markets. My preference for the US not only comes from the fact that it's one of the biggest global markets and from focusing on it as well, but globally, at least in our experience in our industries, American customers buy faster. They tend to be comfortable spending more, and most importantly, they are much more brutal than other customers with their feedback. And where that really helps is when you've got a British customer and they're very politely smiling and nodding when they do not like the product for some reason and not telling you why that's the case until, they stop using your product and stop paying you money. That's not helpful to you as a startup when you're in the pursuit of product market fit. An American customer, on the other hand, will tell you the day they don't like something, exactly what they don't like about it and why. And they'll do that even before they're a customer. They'll do that in the sales meeting. And so you can learn a lot faster in terms of your market and your customer and your product discovery than, in my opinion, in the States than you do in other markets. And I would put New Zealand and even Australia into those camps as well. I find customers in these markets far too polite that they will feel something and not share that with you, versus the American customer that would always tell you most of the time what they think. And I think that that is really, really valuable as a company.
I think that says a lot about how it needs to be approached as well when you are choosing a country and you are going offshore, that there's these cultural differences. It's not just, is there product market fit, but those people are going to be quite different in business, and understanding actually how we're going to address that and how we're going to hire people who could deal with that market. I used to find anyone will give me a 15-minute meeting in the USA. You can get that meeting, you hustle and you grab it, but then you've got to have a very compelling proposition. Whereas trying to go up into the UK, you have to find out and figure out how on earth you can get that meeting, and you're going round in circles until someone can give you an introduction to the person that you actually want to meet, and then they'll do it, right?
It's a lot more of a club.
It is much more of a club, and the USA is just, I like that. I like that explanation about how brutal they are, and I like it too. It's just great getting that feedback. It's like, just tell me, I want to know, and I can have an answer to it.
And New Yorkers, I find, are the best of the best when it comes to this. They are the most brutal of all of the markets geographically, and that's, I like that.
So anyone who's listening who's American, who wants that feedback, because you do get that from, they're like, oh, we're so rude. I was like,
great.
You're just honest. Like, no, I'm good. Like, tell me. I'd rather know, right?
Because as a product, like, you cannot chase product market fit if you don't know what's working. And you can guess. Like, you can have guesses based on, customer attrition rates, or based on, sales funnel conversions, or based on product metrics. But unless you actually get that real juicy feedback, it's really hard to interpret sometimes the why. And just hearing direct from customers what they do and don't like, magic.
So is there anything that you would have done differently when entering the market?
It took us a while to understand the problem behind the problem of the most important problem that was the easiest to solve. And what I mean by that is we started off by integrating lots of systems and putting data onto a dashboard, because that was the first problem that we found. But actually, if I was to do that all again, it took us a while to work out that actually forecasting was one of the problems behind the problem, that in order to understand all of the data, half of that was being used for, strategic and operational planning, and machine learning was a big opportunity to come in and revolutionize how that was done. And that would have actually remarkably been a simpler problem to solve, to say, give us your visitation stats for the last while. We'll take out, the weather, and we'll get some events and things like that, and then we'll work out how to predict off them. And we probably could have done that as our sort of one of our MVP approaches, rather than going about solving the first problem we found. And that's where I think we didn't get great at doing real product discovery until around like 2020, I think, and during that pandemic times. And maybe if we'd invested a little bit more heavily into our product discovery back in the early days, maybe we would have done that differently and not made that mistake, because I think going forecasting first for us as a product would have been quite different. Who knows though?
But there's there is always a hierarchy of the problem. And, I have received that feedback from investors before. They're like, New Zealanders kind of try and solve too many problems, or generalize the problem. And instead of just going, find the problem, and what is the problem? And if it was like you were saying, I felt that they needed to get their data visualized. That was their biggest problem, because they're doing all the spreadsheet stuff. And slowly you climb to the top, and you're like, their biggest problem in the organization was forecasting, because then they knew what stuff to put on, they knew how much food to get in, they knew all these different things, but it just took you a while to get there.
Yeah. And I think some of that comes down to, coming back to being a data product, not to told that we're special because it's a data product bell, but it kind of feels a little bit like that. Like machine learning is one of those really hard things where it is a technology that's relatively still new, and I think we're still learning as an industry, tech sector, of like how crucial things like trust and transparency are in artificial intelligence and what that really feels like in a user experience. So it is one of those like really, really hard problems to solve. There's things that you can do with the technology, but then there's like, does this solve the product market fit of doing this in a way that's helping the user and in a way that feels familiar and comfortable and usable to them to create value? And it's one of these really sketchy pieces where there's far more to it than just solving the problem itself.
And the trust, I did pick up on that. So potentially you may never have, you probably needed just to get in there and work alongside them before they went, these guys actually know what they're talking about. I trust them to predict and use this strange technology, to actually achieve that goal. So that's very true. So who knows what order needed to come in. Angie, this has been an awesome conversation. I really appreciate you, sharing your knowledge and what you've learnt about from your journey over the time. So thank you so much for coming in and spending time with us and sharing your
Thank you for having me.
I'm Hussein Al-Bedri, producer of These Three Things. This part of the podcast is called The Three Learned Things. Shona and I wanted to briefly reflect on the three key insights we got from today's episode, which is brought to you in association with Callahan Innovations' Upskill products. These products are designed to help startups uncover and acquire the skills they need to succeed.
So before we dive into the three things we learned, I actually wanted to share with you what it was like to sit with Angie and sit across from her, because you can't actually see this in the podcast. But what I found really fascinating is it's really challenging to ask a question, someone's being asked something quite challenging, and then to watch her. She's just such an articulate, deep thinker that I honestly thought I saw all her points lining up in the back of her mind. And as her eyes were flickering and talking to me, I just felt like she was delivering them one after the other. And I was blown away by her, and I loved this conversation with her. What did you learn from today?
Yeah, I found her temperament and approach was really great. I learned a lot of things. The first thing that really resonated with me was when she was talking about her starting journey and how she went from this advice that she got on doing research and spending a year doing her business plan and finally getting dropped into an incubator and going, okay, now you've got to go out and talk to customers. And so her whole thing around research is not your greatest spend of time. Talking to customers is actually a much better way of researching. Just get out there.
And how many times have we heard that in our podcasts?
Yeah.
Really, I think if this whole season, anything has come out of this, it is how valuable it is to get out of your bubble, out of your bias and assumptions, and go talk. And so it's just wonderful to hear her reinforce that. For me, it was a really great next point of her and her team ensure that their product reach to the executive level. And the reason why I found this really important for her to share is because I've heard this before, a really interesting case where a company was doing super well. They were giving away a free product to trial. This is for engineers to bug test. And the engineers loved it. They were getting amazing traction, but there was no clear segmentation as to who your user is and who's going to pay for it. And so this company, even though they did really well to solve one problem, they didn't make it important for that executive team to care enough to spend money on it. So Angie and her team at Dexibit are really clear on who the users are, but also why should they care and who's going to pay for it. And I think that's a really important lesson in the product market fit space.
I think her whole journey of finding her product market fit was really interesting. And the comment that she had around the fact that she feels that it's never finished in the data space, wherever you've got a data product, which kind of brings me to the third learning of love the problem and the industry. It was very clear that she loved being with her customers. She loved being at the sites, at the museums that she services, and she draws a lot of energy from doing that. And that was really important for her to be able to sustain the journey that she's on, especially when she talked about the fact that she started her journey in the US. So she kind of went, why wait for the place you want to be? Why not just start there? And that was a rough journey where it had a lot of travel and it had a lot of, sleeping on couches and so on and so forth. So I found that quite important, that the whole conversation around purpose, so that you can draw that energy to sustain you through the journey.
Can you do me a favor? If you like this episode, can you hit the subscribe button? It really makes a huge difference to us, and it means that we can continue to evolve, grow, and bring more insights from a larger variety of guests. Thank you for listening to These Three Things. Our podcast is fueled by our passion and admiration for startups and the courageous people who create them. A huge thanks to our wonderful listeners and guests, my producer Hussein Al-Badri, our sound and visual crew, Elisa Grishkova and Carl Butler, and our sponsor, Callahan Innovation, who are just as committed and passionate about the ecosystem as we are. Tune in next week for another episode of These Three Things.